Good morning and good evening, folks. Today's topic is about how we can make use of SQL for data science. As you know, SQL is what we use to work with the data. So, SQL is a programming language that we use to query that data from the RDBMS, that is the relational database management system. And when I talk about RDBMS is all about it's a software which will help us in managing the database. Now, let's get started with the agenda. So the agenda is we'll begin our understanding by looking through the data science and why do we need actually SQL for data science. And this is followed by understanding what is SQL, and then we'll look into basics of SQL, and by the end we'll do some hands-on activity on MySQL database. Okay, now after the end of session, so I can share you some installation tips as well if you do not have the MySQL installed. So I'll be using the MySQL workbench which has been installed locally, so I can give you the installation instructions on the same, guys. Now starting with data science. So what is data science? Data science is a process in which we derive the useful insights from the data in order to solve the real world problems. And obviously, in each day, we are generating lots and lots of data. If you just think about any application that you use, guys. Obviously, we are using YouTube. Now, think about it. In each minute, how much users the data is getting uploaded. So it's crazy, isn't it? Now, think about Netflix. So in each part of the world, people are using the Netflix. Now, think about the data that Netflix is generating in each minute, or Facebook. So if you just think about the applications that you already know, so we are generating crazy amounts of data in each day. And the pace of data generation is the reason behind the popularity of high-end technologies such as data science, AI, that is artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning and so on. So like you might have thought as, okay, why are we seeing the demand in AI, machine learning and data science these days compared to older days? So in older days, we didn't had the data. So not just data, guys, we didn't had access to computer itself. Now with the advent of smartphones, prices becoming lower and the network cost becoming lower, and even the chips rate compared to the older days so becoming lower, we have the easier accessibility to the hardware, and every compute company or the enterprise, they want to live in the internet. So hence we are generating lots of data. Now when we have the data, we need some method to analyze that data, and to analyze those data, we'll make use of data science, machine learning, deep learning, and all those tools and technologies. The reason that we want to use those technologies because I want to stay ahead in the game. Okay, so no company wants to be left behind when it comes to the technology. So they want to get the best out of the technology, and AI and machine learning is a go-to tools and technologies which every enterprise wants to leverage at. Okay, so now coming to the topic, why do we actually need SQL when it comes to data science? So as I mentioned already, this SQL or this data science, like as I mentioned, we use it to analyze the data. So in data science, it involves extracting, processing, and analyzing tons of data. Now at present, what we need are the tools that can be used to store and manage this vast amount of data. So uh, when I have a data, obviously I need to be able to store it. And once I have the data in one place, see, I'm generating the data from various devices. So not only just it's a one-way signal, it's also a two-way signal as well, isn't it? So just to give you an example, let's say you update something on your laptop, and the same thing should be it should be updated on a database, and the same changes should be reflected on your other devices as well. So we need a way where uh, where we can store the massive amounts of data, and also it will have the easier ability to retrieve the data. Now, as a data scientist, if I'm interested in building an application, I should be aware as how the data is being stored in my enterprise and how can I get the required data from that particular enterprise. Then only I'll be a successful data scientist, because if I don't know how to get the required data, what's the use of having the analysis ability and all those things, guys? So SQL can be used to store, access, extract massive amounts of data in order to carry out the whole data science process more smoothly. Hence, we require SQL for data science. Now, the next common question, what is SQL or a SQL? So SQL, it actually stands for Structured Query Language, is a query language aimed to manage relational databases. Now using this SQL, we can perform query, we can perform insert, we can perform update to the database, we can perform delete of the tables, or we can delete the database itself, or we can also perform the extraction of data from the database. Now here, as I mentioned, like we use this SQL, or like it says a query language, to manage the relational databases. So this relational databases, or something also called as RDMS. So RDMS is a data management system where data is stored into different tables. When I say tables, data is structured in the format of rows and columns, and the relationships are established between different variables. And to establish a relationship, we'll make use of primary keys and other keys and so on. Okay, so in case of RDBMS, it's a relational database management system where the data is stored, guys. Okay, and data is stored into the different tables, and the variables are linked to each other. And SQL is a programming language that we use to perform query on this database, or to insert a new record to this database, or to update this database, or to delete something from this database, or if I want to extract the data out of this database into a different file format. It could be an Excel sheet, or it could be a CSV file format. Okay, so that's where the picture of RDMS and the SQL comes into play. Now, when it comes to RDBMS, like relational database management system, we have various softwares, guys. So we have MySQL, we have MongoDB, we have Microsoft servers, we have SQLite, and many such RDBMS, relational database management system. And one such relational database management system that we have is MySQL or MySQL. Okay, and we are going to see the demo using this MySQL database. And if you learn one tool, so the other tools are very easy to handle, guys. So you just need to learn one RDBMS. Most of the syntax will be the same, but if you know the syntax in one tool, then you can just do the Google and get to know as, okay, if I want to do the same operation in a different database, what is the code that I have to do. And there are some websites as well where you can enter a code in one RDBMS, let's say MySQL. If you enter a query over there, and you can also get the output as what you should type in a other like other RDBMS. So that means if you're someone who is interested to data science, so you just need to learn one tool, guys. Okay, so we'll make use of MySQL. So the reason that we'll be making use of this MySQL, because one, it is open source. That means it's free to use. And the another best thing is it supports multiple programming interfaces. And not only that, it also supports very large databases, and it's easily customizable. And because of all these reasons, we are going to make use of MySQL. Okay. Now, when I'm creating the database using MySQL, so let's do one thing. I'm going to explain in this manner. I'll just bring my own note. Okay. So when we talk about database, I'm going to represent my database something like this. Okay. I'll say this is my database. So inside this database, I'll be storing the data in terms of tables. So this is my database table. So here in this database table, so as you can clearly see, this is a rectangular arrangement of data. You can, if you're from a non programming background, you can think of this as a matrix. It's a rectangular arrangement of data where I will be having the representation of rows. So I'll be having some column name. So I'll be having some column names, column 1, column 2, column 3, and so on. To, or let's assume this is a database table where it contains the details about employees. So I'll have the details like name, age, and his salary, his experience level. So likewise, I'll be having various column names that I'm having for this database table. Now, intuitively, you can clearly understand if I maintain something along the rows, it means that each row represents a single person information. So in example, for a name, I can say it as Jacob. His name is 25 and his salary is, let's say, 20K, and his experience is 2 years. And another name, let's say Piyush. So his name is, age is 32, salary is, let's say, 2 lakh, and experience is 5 years, and so on. So each row, it actually represents an individual record. So it stores an individual record. And so each column represents an attribute of that individual row. So as you can clearly see, it's an attribute. Attribute, in other words, you can think of it as a property of that particular row. So an example can be, so this name is an attribute. So name is a one of the properties. So properties or an attribute. So age is also one of the properties, and salary is one of the attribute, and experience is one of the attribute of individual employee information that I'm having over here. So a table consists of an attributes, and like these attributes are nothing but the column names, and each row consists of my each row represents my individual record. Now, when I'm storing the data in this tabular structure, when I'm creating a table in this MySQL, I'll have to define as what does my each column represents. That means when I'm defining a database table like this, okay, if I'm defining my database table, I'll have to mention as what are the details that my table contains, or this each column contains. So I have to say, okay, this is a name column, and this is made up of characters, and this is a column of age, and this contains the values which are in the data type of integers, because I cannot have the age in string numbers, isn't it? So like age will be numbers, so numbers I want to store it as an even integer numbers. So I'll say this belongs to the data type of integers. And let's say if I want to get his swipe in, okay, swipe in means, let's assume this is a data of attendance. I want to capture his attendance, so when he came or when he entered the office. So I want to get this swipe in details. So swipe in details means it's actually a timestamp. So I'm storing the data in the timestamp format. And I might get in another one, let's say a salary. Salary can be something as a floating point number. When I say floating point number, it's like an integer with decimal value. Okay, so that is what a floating point number. So the reason that I want to store it in each format, because it will help me in further processing of the data, and it will also help me in storing the data in an efficient manner. So when I say name as character, so it will help me to have the characters as well when I'm defining it. And now along with that, I can also specify as what is the length that I want to store. So at max, I can store up to 255 length. So 255 is what I'll be giving as a max. And integer, so I can say how many number of integer, like what is the length of this field. So how many integers, so will I give 3 length, or will I give 4 length, and so on. And the timestamp, so here the reason that I want to get the data in this timestamp format, because there is a swipe in, and let's say there can be one more column of swipe out. And then if I want to find out as how many hours that he has spent in office, then I can just take the difference between my swipe out and swipe in to get the number of hours in office. Now I can get I'll be able to do this operation when both the column data are present in the same date time format or a timestamp format. Okay, so that is the importance of data types, guys. So when I'm creating a table, I'll have to mention as what is the kind of value my each column stores, and that is called as data type. Now coming to SQL, so coming to MySQL, so while creating the table, so we can specify the data types. So we have various data types that are available in MySQL. So we have numeric data types. Now under this I can specify integer, small integer, floating point number, real number, double means it's a floating point number which has a higher range when which can accept values belonging to higher range. We also have something called as precision, decimal numbers which are in the format of I comma j. So we have various data type, guys. Now coming to character string, we have characters, varchar, that means variable length characters, and we also something called as bit string, boolean, date and time, and we also have something called as timestamp and interval. So these are the various data types that we can assign while creating the columns, guys. Now in our hands-on session, we'll try to use some of the data types that you would see over here, and that would actually make more sense to you when you look into an example in a hands-on manner. So as I mentioned, when we talk about uh, basics, okay, so let's start with basics. So we'll not dive in depth about SQL. So we'll make sure that whatever the concept that you're learning, you will get the best out of it. So first we'll learn the basics. We'll see what are the basic functions that we have, and from then we'll take our analysis further. So the first thing that we are going to learn is how to create a database. Now to create a database in MySQL, we'll just write as create database, and this is followed by our database name. Okay, so we'll just specify like this, and this is going to create a database in our system. And if I want to use that particular database, that means if I want to activate it, we'll say use and excuse me guys, and specify this database name. So create database, this is a command that we would use to create a database, and we use this use command to activate this database. Now, once the database is created, obviously we don't want to stop over there. We want to create a table. Now, if I want to create a table in that database, now after I specify it as use database, I'll just say it as, okay, create table. So create a table, and this is followed by specifying the table name. And once I specify the table name, I can mention, so what are the variables that I want to have in this table, and what are its individual data types. An example can be something as age, integers, comma, salary, float, and let's say name, and I can say character. So in this way, I can create my database table, guys. So first we create a database. This command creates the, okay, this is actually the create table, guys. So create table is a command that we would use to create a table that containing the data variables, and each variable must be defined with respect to its data type. Okay, and then next we have insert into. Now this is another command that we would use to insert a value to my table. So insert into, and in place of name I'll specify my database table name. Okay, and then I'll use this as values, and inside the parenthesis I'll specify the values that I want to fill. Okay, so it says insert into. It is a command which we use it to insert values into the table. Remember guys, the values inserted must align with the defined data types when we created our database table. That means in the previous slide I have mentioned that for the age column, or for the age column, that integer data type is integer. Now let's assume for age column, if I send the value as hello, I'm going to get an error because this hello is actually a string or a character and not an integer data. Hence I'm going to get an error. So in order to avoid the error, we have to make sure that the values, it should be aligned with the defined data types. And next we have another command that is called as select. Now using this select statement, I can select a specific table or a column. So that is what it is going to do. So the syntax of using this select is like this. I'm going to begin by saying it as select, and I'll say star. Star means everything. Okay, star means everything from my table name. And remember guys, you might have observed already, when I'm specifying anything inside my MySQL, it should end with this end of the line, which is denoted by this symbol. Okay, so if you don't specify this, I'll get an error. So it says select star from. This means this command selects a specific table or a column and it's going to extract it. And the command can be modified to extract a specific data. Now in this scenario I mentioned as select star, hence I'm extracting everything, but I can, instead of star, I can specify something over here, and through that I can extract only a required part from my database table. Now apart from this, we have something called as update. Now this is a function that I'll be using to update the data in a database. So let's assume I have the data which has already created, or let's take it in this way. So I'm having a database table already created. So this is a table and this is already created. Now I want to update something. So I wanted to update the name for the person of John. Okay, so I wanted to update the name over here. So in such scenarios, I'll make use of this update command. So I'm going to say update will specify the table name, and then I'm going to set and specify what is the variable that I'm changing over here for this table, and where, that means in which position that I'm changing. If I want to just give you an intuition, let's say this is an employee database. I'm going to say it as update employee database, set variable name, variable like set, and here I'm going to mention it as name is equal to, and I'm going to specify my new name. I'll say new name. Where should I update? Where, let's assume index is equal to 1, or an employee ID is equal to 1 2 3 4 5, which means I want to change the name of my employee whose employee ID is equal to 1 2 3 4 5. So in this way I can update the records once I have created in my database table. So this command allows us to modify any values or variables which are stored in the table. Okay, and where, here I've used, so it selects a variable or a value that we want to change. Now here I'll be specifying my condition, and then we have something called as delete. So if I want to delete something from my table, I'm going to change as delete from table where condition. Okay, so I'll say delete from table where, and then I can specify the condition, and in this way I can delete as well. Next, yeah, so this is a delete guys. Okay, so we use this delete which will allow us to delete the values or variables from the table, and where allow us to pose a condition to delete a specific value. Okay, and lastly, if I want to delete the table itself, in such scenarios I'll make use of the command of drop table. So this is the command. I'll use this command to drop the entire table itself. So drop table, and then I'm going to specify my table name. Okay, so in this way I can drop the table as well. So we have explored these basic functions guys. So we have seen how to create a database. So to create a database, I'll just say create database and I'll specify my database name. And if I want to use it, we'll make use of use statement and use the data frame, use the database. And if I want to create a table, I'll say create table, and then I'm going to create the table in the database. And if I want to insert something, I'm going to make use of insert into, and then I'll specify the table, and after that I'll specify the values inside my parenthesis. If I want to select something, I'll say it as select star from database table. If I want to update something, I'm going to say update, and then I'll update my table, and I'll also specify the condition where I have to do the update. If I want to delete an entry, I'll make use of delete command. And if I want to drop something, that is the dropping the entire table itself, I'll make use of drop command, that is drop table command. Okay, so now that we have learned about the basics of working with MySQL and its common functions, let's create some database and let's run some query on the database that we are going to create. So I have my MySQL workbench already created. All right. So this is the MySQL which I have installed in my local system and we'll be running over here. Okay. So let's do one thing. I'll see if I can create a new file. Okay. So I've created a new SQL file. Okay. Now let's do it. I'll just copy this, or let's execute here itself. That would be easier for us. All right, guys. So in this place, I have actually written the SQL commands. And when I execute, if I want to execute something, I'll select the line and I can click on this lightning button to execute that particular SQL program. All right. Now to test out whether it is working correctly or not, I'll just run this first line. So I'll select this line, I'll click on this button. This is going to execute that particular line. So here I've mentioned as select hello world. Now as a result of this, we could observe in the result grid, it is giving me the output as hello world. Now this confirms that I have the SQL correctly installed and my program is working correctly. Okay, and whenever we are writing the code in MySQL, if I want to add the comments, so comments are nothing but the extra information that we give for other human who is reading our code to understand. Okay, so to add the comments in SQL, I can specify by writing as hash, and then I can write a comment, or I can also write a comment by saying it as dash dash like this, and then I can write a comment. Or if I want to add a multi-line comment in such scenarios, I'll say it as slash star, and then I can write my multi-line comments. So in this example, these 3 lines are the multi-line comments that I've created over here. Okay, so these are the 3 ways to add the comments in SQL, guys. Okay, now that we have seen how to create it, now let's start by creating the database. Now to create the database, as I mentioned already, we have the function that is called as create database. So I mentioned as create database, and I mentioned my table name as Edureka HR. So let me just select this thing and execute this. Okay, so I'm getting an error. The error says I cannot create a database Edureka HR because the database already exists. So let's do one thing. Let's see how we can delete this table. Okay, yeah, to delete this table or to delete this database itself, as I mentioned already, we can make use of the command of drop database. And here I have used the optional argument. So the optional argument or the optional command here says, okay, just a second, guys. I'm just checking why it is not working. Okay, so here the optional argument is this one. So if exist, this is an optional argument I'm specifying. So I'm saying it as delete the table of Edureka HR if exist. So I'll select this line and I'll just execute this. So this has been deleted, which means I have now deleted my Edureka HR table. Okay, so we have first seen how to delete a table. Now let's go ahead and create a database. Now to create the database, I'll say create database Edureka HR. So I'll select this line and I'll just execute this. Okay, so I got a success message. It says as create database Edureka HR, and since it is green, it means it is success. I have created it. Okay, now once I have created it, to check whether it has been created successfully, I can just say it as activate that table that I've just created. So I'll say use Edureka HR. So this table has been activated. All right. So how to check if it is deleted or not? So you can just run this command of use and then specify your database. And if it is not deleted, so it will be used, else you'll get an error. The error would say it as the database doesn't exist. Okay, so I'll just delete this. All right, guys. So we have created the database and we are using the database. Now on this database, we are going to start creating the tables. Now to create a table in a database, we'll give the command as create table and we'll specify the table name. So this command or this line actually requires some explanation, guys. Okay, so create table is a command that I'd use. This is a table name, and inside the parenthesis, I have used a lot of functionalities, guys. So here, create table, and I've mentioned my company employees, that is CO underscore employees. It is the table name that I've given. And here, the first one I've mentioned is ID column. Okay. And after I specify my ID column name, I have mentioned the data type. So what is the data type of that particular column? And after that, I have mentioned my primary key. So that means this ID column is a primary key for my database table. Okay. Now, along with that, I have also mentioned as auto increment. This means when I add any entry for this company employees, at that time, the ID value by default, it will be equal to 1. And when I add another value, it is going to increment by 1. So ID will become 2, ID will become 3, ID will become 4, and so on. So in this way, the ID column will be auto incremented. So ID belongs to the data type of integers, and it is a primary key for my table. And then it like I have also mentioned it as an auto increment. And for the next column, I have mentioned as employee name, and this employee name belongs to the data type of varchar, and this has the length as 255. So varchar means variable length. Okay, character of variable length. So this is an employee name is a by maximum I can have 255 length, guys. So that is what this varchar would mean. Now instead of this varchar, suppose if I used it as char and mentioned as 255. Okay, now if I give any employee name, let's say the employee name is John, that means I've just used only 4 characters. Now if I specify it as char 255, in such scenarios the remaining 251 characters will be padded with white spaces. So that is how it would happen if I'm making use of characteristic data type. Since I'm making use of varchar, so if I write it as John, it will be saved as John itself. It is not going to add any white spaces. Hence, I have used it as varchar. And for the gender, I have mentioned it as a character data type with 1 length. And I have mentioned as not null. That means these data are mandatory if I want to get any record. Okay, and the contact number is also varchar, and it takes 255 characters. And observe, guys, this is an optional one. And age belongs to the data type of integers, and then this is not null. And date created, so this is another column, and this belongs to the data type of timestamp, and I have mentioned as not null. Okay, so that means this is mandatory, and by default this is going to use the system time. Okay, so this is going to use the current system time to get the current system time. Now is a inbuilt function that we have in MySQL, so which will get that current system time. So I'm creating my co-employees table. So the first column is ID, second column is employee name, third column is gender, fourth column is contact number, fifth column is age, sixth column is date created. So this is how I have created my database table. Okay, now after I specified it, I have mentioned as not null, so which means it should be mandatory. Now then I have created some more table, guys. So there is another table. So this table I'm calling it as mentorships, and I'm specifying few more details as well. So there is a table called mentor ID, mentee ID. Okay, I've mentioned my data type. And along with this, okay, so along with these, like mentor ID, mentee ID, status, project. Now, along with this, for this column, okay, I'm creating a primary key. So for each table, we want to add a primary key, guys. Okay. So in this scenario, I'm making three columns together as a primary key. So the combination of three columns is a primary key for this mentorships table. And then I have defined the foreign keys as well. That means when I'm filling up my vendor ID, I have to reference from my employee ID. So that means co-employees is a table. So from this co-employees table, I have to refer my employee ID. So I have mentioned as co-employees ID. Okay. And then there is a mentee ID. So this should be referenced from my co-employees tables of employee ID. So that means in this table of mentorships, okay, so this is a table of mentorships. For this table of mentorships, there is a column of mentor ID and mentee ID. This is nothing but the employee IDs, guys. So these employee IDs is related for my previous table of co-employees. Okay, so that is how I'm building the reference. And along with that, I have mentioned some conditions. So I have mentioned as on delete cascade. That means if I remove any employee ID over there in my original table of co-employees, then that row should be deleted. And I have also mentioned one more condition. It says as on update restrict. That means when I have a reference of this co-employee inside this mentorship table, in such scenarios, I'm not allowed to modify the entries in this co-employees. So this is how I'm specifying the condition as how my tables should be updated and how it has to be referenced. Now, along with that, I've mentioned the constraints. So constraint means this is the constraint or the condition that I have put. Now, in order to refer this constraint in an easy manner at a later stage, I have created my own constraint. So I have mentioned as constraint fk1, foreign key 1, and constraint fk2. So I've just mentioned my own constraint for my future purpose. If I want to modify or delete something, so I can just call my fk1 and fk2 instead of specifying the entire thing. Okay, now along with that, I have mentioned one more thing that is called as mentor ID and mentee ID. So these two column values should be unique. That means the combination of two columns should be unique. So the difference between primary key and unique keys, for a single database table, I can have only one primary key, but I can have multiple unique columns. Okay, so I have mentioned this condition like this, and I have created two tables. So we have seen how to create a database, and we have also seen how to use the database. Now we have seen how to create a table inside the database. Now let's see what are the other activities that we can do. Now we have a command that is called as describe. Let's do one thing. Let's just create this entire thing and then describe our table. So I've selected all the lines and I've clicked on this button. Okay, now once I click on this describe co-employees, so this is going to tell me as this is the result. You can clearly see it says what are the column names that I'm having, what is the data type of these columns, and whether does it allow null entries, that means blank entries. So in my co-employees table, contact number is optional. So hence it says as null is equal to yes. And it also says what is the primary key. So in the table of co-employees, the primary key is ID. Now if I say describe my mentorship table, so this for this example, so we have the primary keys. For the primary keys are mentor ID, mentee ID, and project. So the combination of three are the primary key. Okay, now if I want to rename my table, I can do a rename by saying it as rename table and then specify the new name. So this is my old name and this is a new name. So I have done the rename activity. Now if I say describe employees, so I can get the output. Okay, now if I want to alter something, Okay, if I want to alter something, alter is something where once the table is created, I wanted to add a column over there, or I wanted to remove a column. In such scenarios, I can make use of this command of alter table. So alter table, and I'm specifying my table name, and here I'm mentioning it as how I should alter. So I'm saying it as drop the column of age. Now just observe guys, currently my uh, employee is showing like this. My employee table has ID, employee name, gender, contact number, age, and so on. So all these columns that I'm having. Now once I execute this, observe what will happen. So I'm removing the age column, and then I'm adding a new column as salary. Okay, and then I'm adding a new column as years in company, and I'm also mentioning as where it should come. So I'm saying it as salary column should come after the column of contact number, and I'm saying this as years in company should come after the salary. So I'll execute this line. Okay, now I'm going to copy this line over here and I'll paste it here. See, I have added two new columns, salary and years in company, and this has been added after this contact number, just like I have specified earlier. And if you closely observe, the age column has been removed. So that's how simple it is to work with this MySQL, guys. And if I want to insert any value to my database table, so I'm going to say it as insert into, will specify the employees, that is the table name, and inside the parenthesis we'll specify in which way I'm sending the values. So the values that I'm sending it are for these variables: employee name, gender, contact number, salary, years in company. So if you closely observe, I'm not sending anything for ID and date created. The reason because default value for this date created is current timestamp. So that is what my table conveys. And the for ID column, this is an auto increment. So I don't have to specify it manually for this scenario. So I'm just adding the values: name, gender, phone number, salary, and the years and the company. So I'll do one thing. I'll just select everything. So this is going to add some dummy records from my database table. Now, once that is done, I can say select star from employees. See, we can clearly observe the values that we are sending. So whatever the values that I've inserted, it is visible for me in my database table. In the same way, here I'm adding some dummy values for my mentorships table, and I can just call like this: select star from mentorships, and this is going to display everything from my mentorship table. And if I want to update something, I can say update, specify my table name, and here I'm setting the contact number where the ID is equal to 1. So before I do this update, let's just display our employees table. So this is, I'll say it as select star from employees. Now observe closely, the index 1 has the contact number as 51651465668. Now here I'm changing the contact number to this value where the ID is 1. So I'm changing the phone number of James Lee. So let me just execute this, and now I'll display the table. See, 51651411729, just like I have mentioned over here. And if I want to delete something, I can say delete from employees where ID is equal to something. And in this way, I can delete a single entry from a table. So ID is equal to 5, and ID is equal to 5. I'm having shouting. So this is the entry that I'm trying to remove. So I'll just execute this. Now if I display my employees, see, the ID 5 has been removed from my database table. So we have seen how to insert an entry to my data frame, how to modify, how to delete, as well as how to update as well. So that's how easy it is to work with MySQL, guys. Okay, thank you so much guys for joining. Bye.